Welcome. Today is the 12th day of Av, the 16th of August, and we're going to be looking at the 6th reading of Parashat Vayetchanan. The 6th reading opens with what is possibly the most famous passage in the entire Pentateuch, and that is the Shema. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Usually translated as Hear, O Israel, God is, Havaya is our God, Havaya is one. A lot of people know the first verse, maybe they're not so familiar with the rest of the verses. So what I want to do today, because this is so important, is first of all I want to draw your attention to the morning classes where we've been, I think we're in the 30th class about 30th installment of our series on what is prayer, and prayer according to Hasidic thought and in general. And we've been dedicating about the last 10 or 12 or 13 installments, each one's just 15 minutes, to the Shema, because we're basically following a pre-written article from the third Rebbe of Chabad, the Tzemach Tzedek. And we've been talking about this in tremendous depth, and particularly today, where we explain the whole paragraph and what it means that it has 42 words, and the topic is loving God. And what does 42 have to do with loving God, and so on. So I really want to refer you to there if you want to learn more about it. What I want to do today is just look at some very basic things in this reading, and there's some very, very famous things, and also some things that are not so well known. So let's start off with the Rashi on this. What does it mean, Hear, O Israel, Havaya is our God, Havaya is one? Rashi says something quite amazing. He says, Havaya is our God. What is that? That's an exclusion. It's saying He's our God. How can you say that? God created the world and everyone in it, so He should be everyone's God. So why does the Torah say Havaya is our God? Says Rashi, Havaya, who is now, meaning in the present, our God, and not the God of other peoples of the world. He will at some future time be the one sole God. So that's what it means Havaya is our God, Havaya is one. Again, Rashi takes this at a very simple, straightforward level. It's not talking about God's oneness, one's unity, and so on. It's just saying that the fact that we believe that God created the world, the fact that we believe God is one, it cannot be split into a multiple. We're not polytheists, we're not tripartites, we don't do any of these things. In the end, everything is God, God is one. That is our current faith, and we're the only ones who have it. But in the future, it will be the faith of all the peoples of the world. And here he quotes the very, very famous verse from Tzefania, For then I will turn to the peoples, meaning the peoples of the entire world, a pure language, that they may all call upon the name of God, the name of Havaya. And that's in Tzefania 3:9. And it is further said at the end of Zechariah, on that day, God, Havaya, will be one, and His name will be one. There's so many explanations of this in Kabbalah and Chassidus. The simple explanation of God being one is that all the world will recognize God as one. And that is what the first verse of the Shema is about. If we continue, what is the next verse? The next verse says, And you shall love Havaya, your God, with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your, the way it's described is with all of your more. That's how Rav Steinsaltz, my teacher, used to translate this, and he always loved this. It means that you always have to step out of your limits in order to love God. To love God doesn't mean, it's not romantic love. It's not the way I would love, and it's not material love in the way that I would love, a certain food that I love to eat. It's not even the love that I have for my children. It's not even the love I have for my parents. It's love in the sense of connection. The connection to God has to override all my other connections. In this sense, it is true that Judaism does agree a little bit, just a little bit here, just in this sense, with the Oriental, the religions of the Far East that seek detachment from this world. And we talked about this in length this morning and the morning before, and again in the series that you can find on my YouTube channel on prayer. There is one place that we agree with this, that when it comes to attaching to God, in order to truly attach, one has to sever all other connections. One has to go beyond the limits of our other connections. And then you can really love God, which means really connect to God and see God as the purpose of life. And at some point, I hope I get a chance to talk about this more, but the challenge of life, according to Torah, is to dedicate each moment to finding the godliness in my reality. That's really what life is about. Now, in order to make sure that I actually come in contact with something, I have to have certain attachments. I have to attach to the material world, I have to attach to my family, I have to attach to my work, and so on. I need that in order to focus me or to direct me, to make sure that I don't just stay at home or stay in my room and not do anything, but rather attach to the world, and through my attachment to the world, go beyond that attachment in order to find the godliness in everything. The continuation is that you need to impress this upon your children. Recite them when you stay at home, meaning recite these words when you stay at home. I'm looking at verse 7, Deuteronomy 6, verse 7. And when you are away, when you lie down, and when you get up. From this, the sages learned that to impress, here it says to impress, it's really to repeat it. Vishinantam is to repeat something to the point where it's memorized. This is a question that a lot of people have, and unfortunately, I've encountered many rabbis, people who know law, who know Shulchan Aruch, who don't know the answer to a question that a lot of people ask, which is, what constitutes knowing the Torah? What does it mean to know the Torah? This verse is basically saying that you need to recite things, you need to repeat them until they're impressed upon you. And this is the responsibility of the parent for the child, but if the parent doesn't do it, then we have to do it for ourselves. And this is called the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, of learning Torah. So what is this? What is the scope of this mitzvah? Does a person need to know every single book I have in this library by heart? What does it mean? Rashi says, listen to how he describes this. He says that in order for you to impress it on you, he says this word expresses the idea of being sharply impressed. The meaning being that they should be impressed, meaning familiar in your mouth, so that if a person asks you anything concerning them, you will not need to even stammer, meaning hesitate about it, but will be able to tell him forthwith. So again, question about what? What things? Is it just these 6 verses? Is it something beyond that? Interestingly, this question was not answered in a clear and defined manner until the first Rebbe of Chabad. The first Rebbe of Chabad, apart from being a genius in all the areas of Torah, he was a compiler of a new Shulchan Aruch, a new code of law. The reason it was needed was there was about 250 years after the first code of law had been compiled by Rabbi Yosef Karo in Tzfat, and there had been many developments. And also you have to understand that the world was beginning to change. We're already, in his lifetime, we're well into the first industrial revolution. And once the industry changed, many new questions arose regarding things that are permissible or not permissible. So he had to, at the command of his teacher, the Maggid of Mezrich, the successor of the Baal Shem Tov, he wrote a new code of law. Unfortunately, a lot of it was burnt and we didn't get it, but we do have parts of it. One of the parts that thankfully we have is the first part that he actually wrote, which actually makes sense. It's called the Laws of Studying Torah. And there he addresses this question. What does a person need to know by heart to impress upon himself in such a way that he knows this, that he won't stammer, he won't hesitate when asked, in order to fulfill the scope of this commandment, to know the Torah. And he writes something very interesting. Again, I said, a lot of people don't know this. You need to know the ruling regarding all the laws that are practiced in your time. That's what you need to know. You don't need to know the Bible by heart. You don't need to know the Talmud by heart. You don't even necessarily have to know how to learn, although it would be hard to be able to even treat these legal rulings without knowing how to learn. But in any case, you have to know all the legal rulings, meaning that the most important thing is to know how to conduct yourself. Legal rulings is not the way it may be heard in English, like it's something goes on in some dark and closed court of law. Legal rulings in Judaism means, what are you allowed and not allowed to do on Shabbat, for instance? What are you allowed and not allowed to do in business? What are you allowed to eat? What are you not allowed to eat? You have to know all the legal rulings in your time period. And the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, he writes something very interesting. He says, since these begin to proliferate and become infinite in number, so you would never know everything. It's almost impossible. So he says, really, it's only what the sages had determined up to the time of the end of the Babylonian exile, we'll call it. It's not the Babylonian exile that was in time of between the first and second temples. We're talking about the time that the crux of Judaism, the numbers and the schools of learning were in Babylon. This lasted till about the year 1000. After that, it moved to Europe, to some North African countries, but it moved out of Babylon. So up to that time, you have to know what it is, and there's a very simple way to define this. And the definition is basically what Maimonides brings in his code of law. That you need to know. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe, he didn't really mention this when he made this idea, but every year there's a custom by many people to finish rereading, relearning the Maimonides code of law. Okay, I just want to end with one small additional thing, which is very interesting, and I think you'll appreciate this. It's a little bit of an excursion that we've already made. In verse 20 it says, if your child asks you at some point in the future saying, what are the testimonies, the rules, the ordinances that God or Havaya our God has commanded you? So, I don't know if you recognize this, but this is the question that the wise son asks in the Haggadah. On Seder night, we read the Haggadah, and the Haggadah starts off, when we read it, with the verses that are also from our Parsha, right away, the next verse, verse 21, the answer. It starts off actually with the answer, and it says, you should answer your child, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and Havaya took us out of Egypt with a strong hand, with a mighty hand. But this comes, in Hebrew it's Avadim Ainu leparo b'Mitzrayim, v'tzienu Hashem mimitzrayim b'yad chazaka. That is what starts off the Haggadah. And then it goes, there's a small section after that, and then it says, the Torah speaks of four children. The first three children, if you remember, we talked about this year when we were in Parshat Bo. In Parshat Bo, we find the questions and answers given to each one of the three other children. The wicked son, the son who is a earnest son, who's simple in that sense, and the son who doesn't know how to ask, that you have to get him to ask. As we know, we've discussed this many times, that the essence of Judaism is the questioning. You have to know how to question. And you're always rewarded even more for a good question than for a good answer. And I always repeat in this context what Rav Steinsaltz told me once, he told to a lot of people, I'm sure, that when he became a returnee to observance, became a Baal Tshuva, a friend of his came to him, an older man, and said to him, so did you find answers to the questions you were bothered by? assuming that the person returning to observance is now wiser and found answers to his questions, and that's why he's done this. And he says, not necessarily, but I have much better questions. Because the point of Torah is to awaken the mind, it is to awaken the intellect, because the intellect is our vehicle to knowing God. You can't know God without the intellect being active, questioning, thinking. You need to use that part of our anatomy in order to connect to God. Obviously, above that is faith, but you still need to use the brain because God gave it to us for a purpose, and the purpose is to be able to question. So here we see the wise son. He's the one who's called here, the one who asks about the ordinances, the rules, the commands, and so on. And this ties in very beautifully with the beginning of our reading, that if you've taught him how to start learning Torah, that's the question he's going to ask. He's going to ask you about the commandments. He's going to ask you, so what is it that we need to do? What is it exactly that we are required to do by God? There's a few other things I wanted to get into, but we've run over time. So I wish everyone a good Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom. I hope to see you in good health next week. All the best.